Thank you for the introduction and for having me here. And before I get into my presentation, I want to say that this study is part of a big project that we are running here at the University of Iowa, looking at speech and noise perception in the cochlear implant population. And here I had the chance to look at the effect of tinnitus on speech and noise abilities in the cochlear implant population. So, as a background, if you look at previous literature that studies speech and noise perception in tinnitus, you will find that there's no clear results regarding the effect of tinnitus on speech and noise perception. So, some studies have found that tinnitus is associated with deficits in speech and noise perception, while other studies have shown no differences regarding speech and noise abilities between tinnitus and non-tinnitus listeners. However, a recent meta-analysis study have shown that indeed tinnitus is associated with a decline in speech and noise perception, and that came down to two main factors. The first one was the limited cognitive resources that people with tinnitus have, and the other one is the presence of hearing loss. And we know that these factors are also affected by cochlear implantation. Cochlear implant devices help restore hearing and also improve cognitive abilities. So, if you take account of these two factors with cochlear implantation, then what happens in the cochlear implant population when there's tinnitus? In other words, does tinnitus influence speech and noise perception in the cochlear implant population when you control for hearing loss and cognitive abilities? And that's what I aimed to investigate in this study. And I focused here on behavioral and also neural responses to speech and noise perception in two subpopulations of cochlear implant users, one that has tinnitus and one that does not have tinnitus. So I had a large pool of cochlear implant users, and I randomly selected 30 people who have tinnitus and 30 other people who do not have tinnitus. And one important thing that I want to mention here is that when I selected these people, I did not try to match for any demographic factors, but it was serendipitous that both of these groups turned up to be matching based on age, duration of using the cochlear implant, and also unaided hearing thresholds. And one thing I want to mention here about the tinnitus group is that most of these subjects had mild to moderate tinnitus severity. We had a couple who had severe tinnitus, but as you can see here from the tinnitus handicap score, it was around mild tinnitus severity. The task that we used here is a alternative forced choice speech and noise task, which was Iowa test of consonant perception. Now, this test has been validated here on normal hearing and cochlear implant users, and we have also a British version of the same task. The test is composed of 120 consonant-vowel consonant words that are presented at a signal-to-noise ratio of 7 dB. And as you can see here from the figure, the trial starts with a noise that goes on for 2 seconds, and then halfway through the noise, which is 1 second after the onset of the sound, a word will appear. And after the sound offset, a prompt will show up on the screen asking the subject to select from 4 choices the word that the subject has heard. And these 4 choices only differ in their first consonant. Now I'm showing the results for task performance, and on the left side, this is the result for accuracy. On the right side is the result for reaction time. The box plots in gray are showing the results for the no tinnitus group, and the one in turquoise is showing the results for the tinnitus group. And as you can see here, we did not find significant differences in task performance between both groups. And that's kind of interesting because it tells us that if you control well for demographic factors, then tinnitus does not show a clear effect on speech and noise abilities in the cochlear implant population. Now, moving on to neural responses. Here I'm showing the results for evoked responses, and I measured evoked responses across 5 frontocentral channels. And here in the bottom, I'm showing the topographies for different time points of these evoked responses. And it shows these time points based on the peak amplitude that you get when you average the evoked responses for both groups. So looking at the noise onset, we see that there's no clear differences in the amplitude between both the tinnitus and no tinnitus groups, although the N1 response seems to be slightly muted in the tinnitus group as compared to the no tinnitus group. And if we look at the word onset, the no tinnitus group shows an evoked response that has similar topography to that of the noise onset. However, surprisingly, we do not find evoked responses to the word onset in the tinnitus group. Now, that's very surprising. And remember that both groups have performed at the same level when they did this task. So one might expect that you would find evoked responses in both groups, but we did not see that here. And next here, I just wanted to see if these evoked responses significantly differ across both the groups. And the only time point that came out to be significant is this positive deflection after the word onset. So this turned out to be significant between the tinnitus and no tinnitus groups. So looking at the results from evoked responses, it looks like that the tinnitus group is relying on possibly a different neural response that is not reflected on evoked responses. And this is where I looked at non-phase locked induced neural responses. So here I ran time frequency analysis by averaging power across all channels. And on the top panel, I'm showing the results for the no tinnitus group. The bottom one is showing the results for the tinnitus group. And generally speaking, they look similar. So what I did next is that I quantified power across 3 different frequency bands, theta, alpha, and beta, and then compared that across both groups. And this is what I'm showing next. So this is the time course for induced power responses. Here in the top is the result for the theta. The middle is showing the results for alpha, and then the bottom one is for beta. Now, generally, if you look at it, there's no significant differences at any time point between both groups. However, if you look at the responses after the word onset, you would see that there's a separation between both groups in alpha and beta. So that made me wonder whether this separation has anything to do with tinnitus or possibly speech and noise task performance. So I took the average of induced power responses after the onset of the word and correlated that, tried to run a correlation with THI scores and also with task accuracy. I did not find a significant correlation with task accuracy. However, the alpha power turned out to be positively correlated with THI scores. The same effect was found also for beta responses, no significant correlation with task performance. However, beta also correlated with THI scores. So looking at these correlations, it tells us that the worse is your tinnitus severity, the less alpha and beta power responses you get after the onset of the word. In summary, we did not find evidence that tinnitus impact speech and noise performance in the cochlear implant population. However, we found that tinnitus is associated with a lack of evoked responses to the onset of the word, and this might indicate that tinnitus have some influence on speech and unmasking neural responses. And at this point, we're still looking more into this. And the last point I want to make here is that tinnitus severity is positively correlated with weaker alpha and beta responses after the onset of the word. And that suggests that tinnitus might have an effect on cognitive processes associated with speech and noise perception. And the take-home message here is that despite having similar performance on the task, brain responses to speech and noise differ between tinnitus and non-tinnitus cochlear implant users. And this is the end of my presentation. And if you have any questions, please let me know.